how can people get better at facing things that scare them?
The main thing to understand about your fear and anxiety is that anxiety and fear are a whole brain response. Whole brain meaning your left brain and your right brain. Now, the left and right hemispheres of the brain are not the same. The left brain controls your logic. The right brain controls your emotion. So whenever an external input presents itself, whether it's a ball of socks in the corner that you think is a rat, or whether it's an actual human being pointing a gun at your face, whenever external data presents itself, the brain, both the left brain and the right brain, simultaneously get that input. They get that input because our five senses, sight, sound, feeling, smell, taste, all five of those senses are connected to both hemispheres of the brain simultaneously. So that means when something that triggers your anxiety or triggers your fear presents itself, it's presenting itself to both your logical brain, your rational brain, and your emotional brain or your irrational brain. It's connecting to both simultaneously. For most people, they don't realize that. They don't realize that the input is hitting both your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere simultaneously. The makeup of the brain, the chemical nature of the brain, means that the right hemisphere of your brain processes information faster because it relies on a series of cognitive biases, internal beliefs, and assumptions. That's why creative people like artists, musicians, even carpenters, you'll find that creative people often create very similar ways, meaning a musician will create more of the same kind of music. That's why you see rappers create more rap, country musicians create more country songs, right? Harp players create more harp music. It's because their creative brain is very congruous. It's very consistent. They see the world through this lens of biases, predispositions, and assumptions. So that makes the right side of your brain, the irrational, emotional side of your brain, it makes it work very quickly. Whereas your logical brain, the left side of your brain, that's the part of your brain that's charged with executing rational thought, mathematics, engineering, problem solving, the scientific method. Those things go much slower. It takes much more time. That's why you can write a poem or you can write a paragraph. But depending on whether you are gifted in poetry or prose, you will write one or the other faster, right? Because your left logical brain, your rational brain, works through a series of processes, not a series of assumptions. So going back to our point, some external fear input presents itself. Both sides of the brain get that fear input at the same time. Well, guess which side of the brain comes up with a conclusion about that object fastest? The irrational brain, the right side of the brain, because it just processes everything through a series of assumptions and biases. The left side of the brain is still processing the input. It hasn't reached a conclusion yet, but both the left side and the right side of the brain will come to a place in the cerebral cortex, the core of your brain, that will create a physiological response to that input. It's really just a race. It's a race between the left brain and the right brain to who reaches a conclusion first and dictates the physiological response to the external input. Every time that the right brain wins that race, you end up feeling fear or anxiety. By the time the left brain catches up, that is oftentimes the moment where you feel the relief, where you're like, oh, that wasn't a snake. That was just a stick in the grass. So both parts of the brain are processing at the same time. People who have anxiety, they know this very well. They will panic about some what if. What if my children's bus gets in an accident on the way home from school? And they'll take that external fear input and they'll process it and chew it over and over again. And the irrational right side of their brain will take over, and it'll make them panicky. It'll create indigestion. It'll make their heart rate increase. It'll make their body temperature increase. It'll give them cold sweats. Meanwhile, the left side of their brain is like, it's not likely that there's going to be an accident. If there is an accident, it's a big bus. That bus is probably going to do more damage to the car than the car that hits the bus. But all of that logical thinking is drowned out by the chaos that's coming from the irrational brain. So the way that people can learn to fix or counteract the process is they can learn to understand that they should not make a conclusion. Do not land on a conclusion as quickly as you normally would. You know that both sides of your brain are processing the information, and you know that both sides of the brain are going to process that information very quickly. So all you have to do is give yourself a few seconds of discomfort before you reach a conclusion, to give your left logical hemisphere a chance to process that information and give you a competing conclusion to what your right irrational brain tells you. So if you're afraid that someone's going to hate you because you asked a certain question, if you're nervous that you're going to not get paid at the end of the month, or you're afraid that your company is going to go upside down, or you're nervous that you're not going to make payroll by the end of the quarter, you have to give yourself just a few seconds while you're pondering that emotional conclusion. Give your body a chance to create a rational conclusion. And then when your hippocampus, the part of your body that makes that physiological response, when the hippocampus receives both left and right side inputs, it will significantly reduce the physiological response that you're accustomed to feeling from your anxiety or your fear. A very heavy scientific explanation there, Doug, but that is the anatomy of what's happening when you feel fear or anxiety.
And as far as improving your ability to deal with fear, discomfort, anxiety, do you think it's more effective to practice like certain stress inoculation techniques? Or do you think it's better to do things like exposure therapy? Like, what do you think is the most effective for somebody who understands all this and they want to get better at taking chances on themselves that might scare them?
Yeah, absolutely. Stress inoculation and exposure therapy are variations of the same thing.
Right.
But they're both the better way to go. Without a doubt, the way to go is to practice the skill. Spend more time taking more risks, but take smaller risks, because that increases your risk tolerance, which increases your logical brain's processing time to be able to go through and make a reasonable, rational conclusion.
CIA believes that all people are born with a spy secret superpower. For some people, that means they can win deals. For others, they can spot liars. Some can even seduce lovers. I built a free 3-minute test to help reveal to you exactly what your secret hidden superpower is. All you have to do is click on the link in the description below, take the test, and start using your spy superpower to stay ahead of 99% of people.
And it helps you practice slowing your irrational brain down. So essentially, you have to be a traffic cop that stops your emotional brain, and it's like a crossing guard that stops the emotional brain while giving time for the logical brain to catch up, right? So that's the way to go about it. The 100% the way not to go about it is through all of the mainstream meditation techniques that you hear, the mindfulness practices, these guided meditations. The meditation is effective, but what it's effective at doing is it's effective at taking you away from what's currently bothering you. It's not helping you process what's currently bothering you. It's just distracting you. It's a crutch. It's distracting you because it's engaging your creative brain in some other endeavor so that your logical brain can still process, because your logical brain isn't needed to do a meditation, right? Your logical brain isn't needed for a visualization. When some hypnotist or some therapist is telling you to visualize waves on a sandy shore, that's 100%, that's your right brain, your creative brain. Your left brain is left to process. So all of the meditation stuff out there is just a distraction. It's not a tool that helps you to actually improve. It's just a crutch. Will you feel better? Yes, you will feel better. Will you get better? No, you will not get better, because you will always have to use the crutch. Whereas what we're talking about is a practical exercise to actually get better, to take more risks, to process anxiety faster, to reduce your overall anxiety without having to spend time in a set of crutches or in a wheelchair, like what happens with meditation or mindfulness exercises.
What would be an example of something somebody could do on like an everyday basis to work on that skill of being able to be more comfortable with dealing with anxiety, fear, and stress?
So one of my favorite practices is actually journaling, because when you journal, it does two things, right? Journaling, one, helps you create a record of what you've experienced. And two, the actual physical act of writing in a journal, whether it's a digital journal or a physical journal, the actual process of writing in the journal means that you have to engage both your left and right hemispheres of your brain to create this document that gets put into a book. So when you journal, and you're journaling with an eye towards becoming more effective at taking risks and reducing your anxiety, the specific things that you want to journal are the moments in the day that caused you anxiety. And then you also want to journal what you did in those moments to reduce or overcome your anxiety. So, for example, if you have I'm an entrepreneur, so I tie a lot of things back to business. If you see a low sales day, right? If I'm accustomed to seeing $2,000 in sale per day and I see $500 in sales per day, it's really easy for me to start worrying about what's the end of the month going to look like. Am I going to meet payroll? What's the next quarter going to look like? Am I going to lose my business? If I lose my business, how am I going to lose my house? You can see how this anxiety gets out of control for a lot of people. So in this journaling example, you would literally journal. You would, at the moment where that happens, you would grab your journal and you would write down, here's the date, here's the time, here's the thought. Today's a low sales day. I've started feeling anxiety about not making enough money for payroll at the end of the month. And then literally also start journaling what your logical brain is trying to say that you can't hear over your irrational brain. Well, my logical brain is saying that today is Wednesday. And when I look back over all of my weekly sales, Wednesday is always a low sales day. And this Wednesday is a holiday. And people that buy my product aren't going to my store on a holiday. When you start to like journal out what your logical brain is telling you, you actually start to slow down that irrational brain, speed up the rational brain, and document the whole process. So tomorrow, when I look at my sales and my sales are up, I can always look back at my journal and say, oh, look at that. Like yesterday, I was so afraid that sales were down. Today, sales are up. Well, today's Thursday. Thursday's different than Wednesday. Next week, when I have a meltdown on Wednesday, I can page back through my journal and see that I had a meltdown every Wednesday for the preceding 6 Wednesdays. And here was my conclusion. Well, guess what happens by Wednesday number 7? By Wednesday number 7, I've already learned sales are down on Wednesdays. Nothing to worry about.
Right. And then as far as somebody being able to problem solve in the thick of stress, fear, anxiety, any tips for somebody to be able to be able to do so? I know we've already talked about like why people shouldn't always trust their gut, what they should do instead in the context of like conversations and stuff, but like a high stress moment, any tips specifically for that?
Absolutely. The biggest tip is to understand that most of us put an inaccurate sense of urgency on decision making. Very rarely do decisions have to be made in an urgent fashion, meaning decisions don't have to be made in a few seconds. Decisions don't even have to be made really in a few minutes. Most decisions can wait 15, 20, 30 minutes before they're actually made, right? Now, if your child has a hatchet in their forehead, maybe you have to make a faster decision than 10 or 15 minutes, right? You have to decide to go to the emergency room right away. But there's a reason that most emergency rooms make you wait 30 minutes to 2 hours, because most things that we think are urgent are actually not urgent. So for people who have to feel this stress to make a decision in the thick of it, to use your words, in a moment of high stress, the biggest tip to understand, you very rarely ever have to make a decision in a moment of high stress. If you just take a moment, a few seconds to just stop and think, just stop and breathe, let your left logical brain catch up to your irrational right brain, let the two actually process at the same time. And what you will find is the decision that you need to make doesn't have to be made right now. I have another 15 minutes before I have to make this call. I have another few hours before I need to update anybody, right? I just got a text message or an email that's upsetting to me. I don't have to respond to it right now. I have time on my side. Time is the missing resource for most people when they feel a false sense of urgency about making a decision.